77 years on, the 228 incident still shapes Taiwan. We find out what it means to today's Taiwanese. More Chinese vessels are spotted around the Kinmen Islands as Beijing ramps up the pressure over fishers' deaths. Paying for their prison sentence, how Taiwan's inmates are footing the bill for their own incarceration. Plus,
we're here in Japan's Kumamoto, where a school has been racing to build new classrooms as more Taiwanese families move here.
Hello and welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Eric Gao. 77 years after the 228 incident, people in Taiwan are still calling for more progress to be made to address the victims. Tiffany Wong reports from Chiayi County, the site of some of the worst political violence.
A moment of silence to remember the dead. Here in Chiayi County in central Taiwan, hundreds have gathered on the 77th anniversary of what's known as 228, an anti-government uprising on the 28th of February that kicked off a period of state-sanctioned violence. Thousands were killed across the country by military police, many of them local political elites who lived in Taiwan long before the Chinese nationalist government took control of the island. Speaking for others who also lost family members in the 228 incident, Jiang Rongsan said that he hoped their suffering would not be forgotten. Attending the ceremony for the last time as head of state, outgoing President Tsai Ing-wen reflected on the progress in transitional justice made in her 8 years in office, and the work still left to do.
这段艰困的过去是台湾历史的伤痕，要治愈伤痕，必须了解受伤的原因。当我们能够诚实的面对真相，互相倾听，才能够缝合伤口，进行真正的和解，让过去的历史不再是台湾分裂的原因，而台湾人民也会因此更能共同守护民主，一起往前走。
Some of the biggest protests after the Chinese nationalist crackdown happened here in Chiayi. As news of the indiscriminate killings in the north reached the county, enraged civilians took to the mayor's residence and threatened to burn it down. Now they were stopped by police, but some were later executed without trial, and their corpses left on display.
Now, 77 years later, the memory of the incident lingers on, and those who lost family members say they're still waiting on full accountability.
有的人拢讲你2摆已经赔偿过啊，但这种伤害唔讲一般人，我都了解。你要认错，我们反正已经过了70几年了，我们也会慢慢放下来。
But forgetting is not on the agenda. And every year, the 228 Memorial Day reminds people that Taiwan was a very different place not too long ago, and that the best way to honor the victims is to prevent such atrocities from ever happening again. Justin Wu and Tiffany Wong in Chiayi County for TaiwanPlus.
In Taipei, young people are also gathering to remember the 228 incident at a music festival held outside a memorial to Taiwan's former dictator, Chiang Kai-shek. Leslie Liao was there.
People have gathered here in Taipei to commemorate the 228 incident, a civic uprising that was brutally put down by Taiwan's government in 1947. This music festival and exhibition remembers a crucial moment in Taiwan's history. This event has been held annually for the past 12 years and is organized by the Taiwan Youth Association for Transitional Justice. I asked a few young people earlier why they think the 228 incident is still relevant to them.
要记住过去的历史，然后对于现在还在努力的议题，我们要继续的努力，这样子。
就是对这个议题、对独立或对自由，然后那一些都蛮有兴趣的。
My parents or my grandparent generation, they have suffering from that tragedy and from that atrocity in the past. And for us not to make the same mistake again, that we need to remember that and trying to bring justice to the futures to come.
But it's not just young people here at this event. Community leaders and members of the older generation are also here to make sure that the 228 incident is remembered.
我们要追溯，然后再来宽恕，所以每年28我们都会参与相关的活动，希望台湾人民记起这个教训，不要让这种威权暴力的这个政府的这种作为再度降临。
The event is taking place here at Liberty Square at the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall, a location dedicated to memorializing Taiwan's oppressive leader who initiated and oversaw decades of martial law. The event's location is symbolic as people are seeking to reclaim what they see as a relic of oppression and reclaim it to memorialize a tragic time in Taiwan's history. Devin Tai and Leslie Liao in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Now, as you heard earlier, President Tsai has been working to heal the wounds of 228. But some files explaining why the incident happened and how many people were repressed in the decades that followed, those are still classified. Louise Watt reports.
Searching for answers to a painful past. Scholar Zheng Jianyuan is trying to understand why his father and family were monitored for more than 30 years by Taiwan's then authoritarian government. All he knows is his father was briefly a low-level member of the underground Chinese Communist Party in the 1950s, caught by police but never imprisoned.
我父亲他没有做过真正所谓的轰轰烈烈的大事，他只是一个青年的学生，他只是参加了组织而已。
His is not the only family to fall victim to sins of the past. From the late 1940s to 80s, Taiwan was under a martial law regime, a period of suppression and fear known as the White Terror. Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang government executed at least 3,000 to 4,000 people and imprisoned around 140,000 for their real or perceived opposition. More than 30 years later, much about the atrocities committed during this period is still unknown. While some archives have been opened, files have been heavily redacted, and others, like that of Zheng's father, are permanently classified, leaving the mystery of why he was being monitored by the state for so long, for an apparently minor case. The secrets lie in there, the Military Intelligence Bureau, where files of people who were surveilled by the state from the 1950s onwards are still kept. The government recently changed the law to allow for the release of more documents related to the White Terror period, but thousands of others will remain classified. President Tsai Ing-wen came to power in 2016 promising transitional justice. She's overseen the public exoneration of almost 6,000 wrongfully convicted people and compensation of $100 million to White Terror victims. But the body she set up to spearhead that work was dissolved in 2022. The Executive Yuan, or the Cabinet's Human Rights Department, said transitional justice is an ongoing process. It says it expects most permanently classified files to be declassified by August 2024, after being reviewed by government agencies, including the National Security Bureau. It says other cases will have confidential parts redacted, and copies of those censored files will be sent to the National Archives Administration. Zheng's father died in 2020, having refused to talk to his family about his actions during the White Terror period. But Zheng, curious by nature, has made it his life's mission to find out, interviewing his father's classmates and publishing a book on what he does know about his father's life. He thinks Taiwan needs to learn from its history.
但是我们要让这些加害者，他们如果当年曾经做过不人道、不合法、不正义的行为，他应当受到历史的审判。
For years, Taiwan's now democratic government has said it wants to redress past injustices. But there is still no closure for some, who continue to wait for answers, to reveal more of a dark period in their country's history and their loved ones' lives. Luffy Lee and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
5 Chinese vessels have been spotted in restricted waters around Taiwan's outlying Kinmen Islands, the latest escalation following the deaths of 2 Chinese fishers. Harrell Hughes brings us this update.
This small fishing boat, being hoisted out of the water, has become the latest flashpoint between Beijing and Taipei. The boat is from China and was spotted off the coast of Kinmen, the outlying Taiwanese islands just kilometers away. Taiwan's Coast Guard gave chase, there was a collision, the boat capsized, and 2 of the fishermen died. And now China is stepping up maritime patrols in the area. On Tuesday, 5 Chinese Coast Guard vessels came close to the islands. 4 entered a restricted zone, and 1 entered prohibited waters, unofficial territorial boundaries that have been tacitly followed since the 1990s.
它的意涵，我想政治的意涵非常的高，好，那当然是一种宣示主权的形式。我们很不乐意于去看到说一个执法的个案，那过去也有过案例。
The incident has piled pressure on Taiwan's Coast Guard, which is now being investigated for criminal negligence, while the families of the fishers demand the return of their bodies and the boat. But locals in Kinmen say intrusions by Chinese fishers are a frequent issue for the Coast Guard.
这个其实我们这边就最严重的问题就是大陆的移民他们跑到沿岸来放网，有时候一来50-60条这样子，尤其像这一次这种案件其实我们那个海巡驱离是很辛苦的。
Tensions remain high, but Taiwan's defense ministry says the military is unlikely to get involved.
都不期望有任何作战这种状况发生。我想那个避战是避免战争，不是避开。他如果意思如何的话，那我们战备规定有很清楚的一个规定，但我们不期望发生这种事情。
Officials are hoping to prevent any further escalation and keep the delicate peace across the strait. Patrick Chen and Harrell Hughes for TaiwanPlus.
Now, that situation in Xiamen has sparked concern that more Chinese Coast Guard vessels in that region could become the new normal. To find out what could develop, our reporter Jaime Ocon spoke to Ray Powell, a security analyst at Stanford University.
Is this situation in Kinmen, with the increased presence of Chinese Coast Guard ships, is this situation going to escalate?
Well, I mean, I think what you're already seeing is that it is escalating now, but that is pretty typical of how China conducts maritime gray zone operations. Is it seeks opportunities to escalate, believing that it has a greater appetite for escalation than its opponent. So we've seen this time and again in the South China Sea and in other locations. So in this case, you had a small boat illegally in Kinmen's waters, and during again, unregistered, no certificate, clearly doing illegal activity, possibly smuggling. And when the Taiwan Coast Guard gives chase, the boat capsizes and two people die. And China has seized on this as an opportunity to increase its patrol. So this shows us how China uses pretext as a method for advancing its strategic objectives.
Looking at the fact that 2 people died, is China justified in any way for increasing its presence around Xiamen?
Well, of course, it's justified entirely in its own framework, since it believes that all of Taiwan belongs to China. So almost anything that it does, it's justified, right? So it doesn't have to justify itself to itself. What it has to do is try to somehow get Taiwan and the rest of the international community to sort of look away or not pay too much attention because, well, it's understandable. But it's really not understandable if you actually take it apart and consider each thing in its own terms. The boat itself was almost certainly engaged in illegal activities, right? Just the characteristics of the boat. It seems unlikely that those activities were legitimate fishing, if it was fishing at all. It looks more like a smuggling operation, frankly. And then the response is over the top. It's sort of almost ridiculously over the top, to suddenly now increase your maritime patrolling within, Kinmen's waters is clearly just exploiting the situation to advance China's goals.
as we're seeing more and more Chinese Coast Guard ships patrol these waters, is this a sign of a new normal?
Well, they've practically announced it, right? So the Global Times just came out with an article that said that we're now going to normalize these activities. And so they've told you already that that's their entire intent, is to give you a new normal. And again, this meets entirely with this pattern that we've seen from China over the years of using the pretext of some event. It could be a tragedy, it could be an incident of some sort, and then to use that as the pretext by which it then takes that next step and then settles everybody in at that next new normal, so that then there can be in the future another new normal.
That was Ray Powell, a security analyst from Stanford University, speaking to our reporter Jaime Okan. Dualo has reaffirmed its diplomatic commitment to Taiwan after appointing a new prime minister earlier this week. In a post on X, Tuvalu's foreign minister shared his government's list of priorities, including plans to strengthen ties with Taiwan. That announcement is a relief for Taipei, as new Prime Minister Feleti Teo's views on maintaining relations had previously been uncertain. Tuvalu is one of just 12 countries that has official diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Taiwan is proud of its progress on many human rights issues, but activists say there are still areas where Taiwan needs to improve, starting with conditions in its prisons. John Van Trieste has this report.
Here inside Taipei prison, hundreds of inmates are hard at work. Some are making paper objects for companies that contract labor out to the prison, while others are in the kitchen, preparing a tofu dish that's become a business success. This is one of a string of prisons that have developed specialized products, from baked goods and soy sauce to pottery, as part of a rehabilitation program. Inmates learn skills prison authorities say will help them get jobs on the outside once their sentences are up. The inmates are paid. Forced labor is illegal in Taiwan.
我们在监狱行刑法里面有规定这个收容人的这个劳作金的一个分配的规定，作业收入扣掉作业支出，大概60%会归为收容人劳作金，但10%还要提供犯罪被害人补偿金。
The percentage that ends up in inmates' pockets today is much higher than it once was. Until the summer of 2022, just a little under 38% of earnings went to them. But the amount inmates earn is still far below what they need to support themselves in prison.
上个月数据来讲，我们全监的平均在这个委托加工，每个人收入大概是500多块，然后视同作业部分大概是800多块。
Meanwhile, the monthly bill for food, power, and basic personal care items like toilet paper adds up to around $95 US. Many inmates simply cannot survive without gifts or cash from relatives or friends. And though they are still covered under Taiwan's national health insurance system, few have money left over for out-of-pocket fees when they fall ill. All this has raised eyebrows among Taiwan's community of human rights activists.
到医院去才能做仪器的检查，那你就变成你要借户外医。那借户外医的车资其实也是收容人自己付的。那监所常常都在很远的地方，像东部的几个监所，借户外医的那个车资可能要接近1000块，他就会觉得说我尽量忍。
Taiwan prides itself on its hard-won democracy and positions itself as a champion of human rights on the world stage. But advocates for prison reform are calling for Taiwan to live up to that billing with livable conditions that allow inmates to focus on reforming themselves and returning to society. Luffy Lee and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Massive wildfires fueled by dry weather have engulfed over 1,000 square kilometers in northern Texas. The largest blaze has already consumed more land than all the wildfires in the state last year. The governor has issued a disaster declaration for 60 counties. Officials in the neighboring state of Oklahoma have ordered evacuations and road closures. Firefighters are facing an uphill battle as an expected cold front could worsen the already dry conditions. Chinese tech giant Huawei has unveiled the world's first 5.5G network at the Mobile World Congress. 5.5G is faster and more stable than current 5G systems. Huawei is gearing up to roll out the network globally this year, despite accusations that it violated U.S. sanctions and export control laws. The system has already been certified in the Middle East, Asia-Pacific, and Europe. In Japan's Kumamoto, a new TSMC Fab is shaking up several sectors. The influx of Taiwanese families is putting pressure on schools, not only to take in more students, but also to adapt their curriculums. Our reporter Joyce Sun visited one that's renovating a whole building to suit the needs of TSMC families.
Getting fitted for his first day of school. 6-year-old Ron is the only Taiwanese student in the inaugural first grade class at Kyushu Lutheran International School, less than an hour's drive from his father's workplace, chip-making giant TSMC's new Japan Fab. Ron and his parents are among over 700 Taiwanese people who've moved to Kumamoto for TSMC. His mom says Ron's been adjusting well, but that starting school will be a big test.
对，就是因为他日文比较不好啊，可能怕跟同学，因为同学们日本人聊天之间都是用日文，比较会聊天啊，所以就是怕他可能有点没办法，怕是没办法融入。他英文 OK， 就听得懂啊，也敢讲一点，所以我是觉得，就是反正是要让他勇敢的把话讲出来。
But Ron's school is not open yet. The school head, Matsumoto Michiyaki, and his team have been racing to add an elementary school, the age group of many TSMC children here.
So we have only 1 year to open a new school. So
the demand
of the TSMC families.
The expansion was also a request from the prefecture's governor. This school is set to become the first private elementary school approved by the prefecture in all of Kumamoto. And in keeping with the speed of TSMC's expansion, they were only given a year to make it happen. Now they're going to welcome their first students here in April after just 6 months of renovation. Matsumoto says working to match TSMC's speed was an important wake-up call.
I was very surprised, their pace. When I get a phone call from the people, can I have a meeting this afternoon? But that's a global standard. I guess that's a global standard. So we have to keep up their pace. That would be a very good challenging for Japanese students, especially in Kumamoto. So they don't know what the world is and how fast the world is changing. So this would be a good chance for Japanese students to know another world.
To keep up, command of the English language is also key, an area Matsumoto says Japan still falls short compared to other countries in the region, like South Korea and Taiwan. To cater to the 3 Taiwanese high schoolers already enrolled, the schools had to get creative, partnering with a Tokyo school to offer online classes in English at their level. This language gap is also becoming evident outside of school grounds. Demand for translators in the area has skyrocketed, adding pressure on the few around, like Sakaguchi Yukihiro. He's come out of retirement to work part-time as an English and Mandarin translator at Kikuyo's town hall. He's one of just 2 translators here.
原来这个外国的公司在熊本里面不多嘛不过相信将来越来越多了。熊本的国际化刚开始嘛。
Sakaguchi says more locals want to learn English and Mandarin to keep up with a globalizing Kumamoto. And for educators like Matsumoto, it's all about making sure the next generation here can thrive, not just through language, but also as global citizens. Joseph Wu and Joyce Tsen in Kumamoto, Japan for TaiwanPlus.
Now, Japan's birth rate dropped to a record low in 2023. As Rosie Greninger explains, the declining birth rate is putting the future of the country at risk.
Japanese streets are known to be bustling and lively, but children are becoming an increasingly rare sight. The country's declining birth rate has been a consistent trend for decades, falling for 50 years. And now the issue is back in the spotlight, with the number of babies born in Japan falling to a record low in 2023, for an 8th consecutive year. Many younger Japanese are hesitating to start a family due to bleak job prospects and higher costs of living.
おばあちゃんとかおじいちゃんとかが協力するっていうことがまず難しくなっているのかなというふうに思うので、やっぱりその社会的な環境の問題でもやっぱり女性が子供を多く抱えて仕事もしながら生活していくというのがそもそも難しいのかなというふうに思っています。
Preliminary data shows the number of births fell 5.1% in 1 year to just over 750,000, the largest ever single decline, while marriages also saw a steep drop. That number will become even more dire when foreign national births are subtracted. With a shrinking workforce and people living longer, Japan needs a population boost. The government responding by introducing a range of measures to tackle the issue, including extending child benefits and childcare leave allowances. But it's now reached a critical stage.
少子化の進行は危機的な状況にありまして、若年人口が急激に減少する2030年代に入るまでのこれからの6年程度が少子化傾向を反転できるかどうかのラストチャンスであり、少子化対策は待ったなしの瀬戸際にあると受け止めております。
Japan's population of more than 125 million is currently projected to fall about 30% to 87 million by 2070, with 4 out of every 10 people aged 65 or older. But facing no reprieve in the declining birth rate, there's serious concerns there soon won't be enough people to support the country's stagnating economy. Eason Pan and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
Taipei Zoo's oldest Asiatic black bear died on Tuesday at the age of 34. Known as Xiamen, or Little Bear, the zoo says it had been suffering from declining health because of its age, and then a few days ago, it couldn't move its back legs anymore. The zoo decided to put Xiamen down to stop its suffering. Asiatic black bears are listed as vulnerable, with deforestation and poaching their biggest threats. Thanks for joining us this evening on TaiwanPlus News. I'm Eric Gao. Take care, and we'll see you next time.